Hey guys, Kirk here, and thank you for joining me on a new video on the channel. This video is going to be the 4th episode of our Asset Master Material series, but this video is probably going to roll on from the previous video, which wasn't in the Asset Master Material series. What I did in the previous video is go over what bump offset and parallax occlusion mapping is, or better known as POM. And I showcased a couple of little materials which you can see on the screen here of using bump offset and parallax occlusion mapping. In this video what I want to do is apply bump offset and parallax occlusion mapping to our master material. If you've not seen the previous video, which is not a part of this series, and you're watching this series, I'd recommend going watching it if you're unsure about bump offset and parallax occlusion mapping. And then come back to this video and you can implement it into your master material. Also, if you're watching the other video, do like it and like this video. It does go a long way to supporting me and my channel. But like I say, on the screen now you see I have a cube sat in the middle of this little bit of a scene. The cube material is actually using bump offset, and the ground plane is actually using parallax occlusion mapping. The bump offset, if I go close to it, you'll see that we have got a bit of depth to our brickwork. But if I go flat onto it, you'll see that the texture is just flat, like so. But if I move out, you'll see that there is some depth to that brickwork that you're seeing on the texture. The same applies for the ground. Looks really nice, that, to be honest. I've got the instance open here for the parallax occlusion mapping. And what I'm going to do is just quickly set this to 0, and now you can see the difference of this ground compared to when we have a bit of POM applied. So if I put 0.03, and you'll see we're getting a bit of depth with that POM on the ground floor on the ground here. So yeah, but like I say, in this video what I want to do is to apply this to our master material using the workflow that we've been using throughout the series, and we'll go from there. So let's get started. So I'm going to open my content drawer. As you can see, I'm back in my Mesh Master. If I come back to the materials tab, you'll see I've got a testing tab here. This is from the previous video where we tested bump offset and POM. Go and check that video out. Also, we'll go back to the Mesh Master. I've got my functions here. I'm going to create a new folder in here. I'm going to call this bump and POM, or bump POM if you like. Like I said, we're going to use the same workflows we have done for the master function, the normal and the UV. We're going to do the same kind of workflow. So I'm going to right click here, go to materials, get a material function. I'm going to call this my naming convention KM bump, same as the folder name, and offset. I'll put another dash and call this logic, like so. And I'm going to quickly duplicate this function. I'm going to press right arrow on the keyboard and get rid of the logic side. Oh wait, now I'm getting a bit of delay. We'll put params in here, like so. Okay, so we're going to open our logic up, and this is where we're going to start building the logic for our bump offset and parallax occlusion mapping. First of all, let's get the node in here. Just going to get a bump node, bump offset. We're going to be using function inputs again, so I'm going to drag off our coordinates and put input. You get a function input. You can see here that it's given me a scalar parameter for the coordinates. We're going to have to change that to a vector 2, and we'll set the preview, and I'm just going to hold U on the keyboard and left click and put that coordinate node into that preview. I do want to change this name though. We're going to put UV's input, like so, and that will be our input for our UVs, obviously. We're going to need a height texture, so I'm going to drag off here and get an input again, and you'll see it's applied a scalar parameter. I'm not sure I want that. I'm going to come to my content drawer, back to masters, go to texture, and I'm just going to drag a height texture in here. I want to change this to a texture 2D, like so, and then right click our height texture. You don't have to bring in a height texture, you really don't. You can just right click and get a texture sample, then right click it and convert to texture object. But in here you could just apply a placeholder, like so, like that, and you could just apply that into it. In fact, I will probably just do that just for argument's sake. And in here I'm going to put height texture, like so. Okay. We're going to need an input for our height ratio. If we get an input, a function input, and we shall name this height amount, like so. Do we want to preview? I'll set a preview. I'm going to hold 1 on the keyboard and left click. I'll just put this to 0.03 like we had in the material instance. And set the preview. Okay, so now we've got our basic controls in here. Something doesn't feel right to me, guys. I feel like I am missing something. I think we're going to need to get that height texture in here. I'll bring this height texture in here. Wait there, let's just highlight the texture. Click on this, and we'll just bring that height texture into there. What I need to do, what I'm thinking now is basically when you use the Quixel textures, our stack textures and the displacement or height texture is normally in the blue channel. So I could drag that blue channel into the height and simply put that into the texture coordinate node, like so. Because if I right click and if you just type OCC, you'll get parallax occlusion mapping, and you'll see here that the height map texture will only accept a texture 2D. So simply because this input is a texture 2D, you could just simply put that in there. So now our bump offset is using this texture sample for its height. Let's just make this look a little neater and tidy. So that's using that height texture, and then we've got our height amount there, which if I do this quickly, like so. So essentially our bump offset is going to use the height texture of our texture sample, which is Quixel because it's in the blue channel. But now I'm thinking that every texture sample or height texture that is applied into this on the outside may not be in the blue channel. It maybe your artist or someone you're building this for have got their own texture like this, where it's not a stack texture. So I'm actually going to drag off here and get a component mask. Right, so I'm going to right click it and convert this to a parameter. I'm going to say height map height texture channel. Now this scalar parameter for this is going to enable us, or the artist should I say, to select what channel their height texture is in. We can go on it and set the blue as a default, like so, and now this component mask is going to use a blue channel of this texture sample. But if someone brings one in, they could just simply click the red one and get rid of it, and the red channel will work as well, which is cool actually. I just thought about that actually. It's quite good for me. Okay, so I'm going to draw a pin down here. if I put this about here, I could just draw straight off there into there. I like to keep things organised. If you're regular viewers of my channel, you'll know this. Okay, so I've got a height amount here, and you'll see here the parallax occlusion mapping, I have a height ratio. I could simply drag off that and put that in the height ratio, as we're going to enable switches here to either use the bump offset or use parallax occlusion mapping. So yeah, the height ratio is right for there and there. Then we're going to drag off our min steps, get an input function, and we could simply call this height min steps. And so I'm going to set this to a preview. I'm just going to duplicate this. I'm going to get rid of that underscore and 1 and set this to max steps, like so. Are they both previewing? Yes, they are. If we hover over the min steps, you'll see the default value is 8. If I get a constant 1 vector and change this value to an 8, and we all know what this does if you've been following along, this just falls back to this value if the outside of this function is not attached, if you like. The max steps default value is 32, so if I get a constant 1 vector again by holding 1 on the keyboard and left clicking, get a constant 1 vector, and we'll change this value to 32. And we'll plug that into our preview. Okay, so next is the UVs. I've already got input for the UVs here, so I could just simply drag off there, put my input there, put my UVs into that input. Like so, just like that, so we can clearly see where the noodles are going. So that's that sorted. We'll push these up here a bit. Height map channel. Okay, so after vigorous testing with this, I have never been able to work out how to expose this to outside this function. What I mean by the height map channel is similar to this component mask that we just added, so the artist can select the height map channel they want to use from this texture. With parallax occlusion mapping, I've tried dragging this into it, it connects but it doesn't work. I've tried using a vector 4, if you hold 4 on the keyboard and left click, it'll get you a vector 4, and converting this to a parameter and using that it'll connect, but it doesn't work. I have tried this in the past before. The only way this can work is to be hard coded in. So if I hold 4 on the keyboard again and get a vector 4, and as standard 99%, well I'd say a good 90% of artists would just use a Quixel material, so the blue channel is going to be our primary, and we'll just have to plug this in here. And this is what I mean by hard coded in. We'll just have to hard code the blue channel in to be used from this texture, which is a real shame, to be honest. Okay, so reference plane. For this, the default value is 1. We're not going to use that default value. I'm just going to hold 1 on the keyboard and get a constant 1 vector. I'm just going to set this to 0.5. The reference plane is basically telling the camera vector which angle is stronger compared to the bottom angle. So the top angle could be stronger than the bottom angle if we set this to 1, and the bottom angle is going to be stronger if we set it to 0. So what I like to do is just set it to 0.5, and that is hard coded in as well, and that's probably best suited, as this floor that's using POM here, even if I come around here, you can see it's not really changing, and this value is just set to 0.5 on the reference plane. Okay, so that essentially, if we apply this, just quickly save our scene, this essentially now is set up. We've got our height texture input, which is going to our texture sample, then we can select a channel, which goes into the height input of our bump offset. Got our coordinates, which are set to a vector 2 on the input, and they both go into the coordinate here, and the UVs are the parallax occlusion mapping function. And we've got our height amount, which is the height ratio for both the POM and the bump offset. And we get to enable min and max steps. And then we've hard coded in our height map channel and our reference plane. If you're unsure about all this and what they do, like I said at the beginning of the video, I'd recommend going back watching the previous video that I released before this one, where I do go through how all this works. Okay, so what I want to do now is just enable our artists to be able to turn on and off whatever they want to use. So if I drag off here and get a static switch, like so, and now this is true, so off the value I'm going to drag off here and get an input or function input, and it'll set it to a static bool automatically. And here we could put use bump offset, like so. We're going to set this as a preview, and then we can drag off this preview and just type bool. We'll get a static bool, and this is just a true and false statement. You all should know that by now. And we'll do this. Okay, so I'm just going to leave the false value now, because I'm not sure how I'm going to do this just yet. I am going to duplicate the switch because I want the same switch for my parallax occlusion mapping. You want to drag off the parallax UVs and put it into the true statement. And then drag off the value and put input for a function input. It's a static bool again. I can just duplicate that and plug that into the input. And then here we could put use POM. Said simply like that. What about preview there? Okay. Let me think. Okay, so I'm going to get another switch parameter because I want to enable the artist to be able to let this function know if it wants to be used or not. So I could just drag off this switch statement into that true statement. Off this value I could get a function input again, and in this value here, this function input, I'm going to put use, what should we call this? Use what? Actually I'll put enable fake displacement. We'll set this value, we'll duplicate this, we'll do that. Now, do I want that name? We'll do this. This string is fine. Okay, let me think. I'm so bad. I come up with all these great switch ideas, but I don't know what to do. Let me think. If we put this switch into the false, so we can enable or disable fake displacement. I don't really like that name, but I'll think about that throughout the video, what to change it to. So if we enable fake displacement, we're enabling POM. But if POM's set to false, it will give us the option for bump offset. So if we enable, fake displacement, see, fake displacement, a lot of artists would understand. Right, so I'm going to change this to enable visual texture depth. Yeah. So if I enable visual texture depth, then I get this option. Because it's already set to false, it will come up for me to enable it, and because this is in the false statement, and it's automatically false, it will just carry through. So I'll have basically both of these switches in front of me once this is enabled. Yep, that's right. And for bump offset's false value, I could just use a constant 1 vector. If you hold 1 on the keyboard and get a constant 1 vector and just put 0 into there, that means if it's not being used, it doesn't do anything. And for this false, could I use a constant 1 vector? For constant 1 vector with a value of 0. Then if enable visual texture is not being used, then it does nothing. But let's just check something out, guys. If I come to my materials, mesh master, functions, I'm going to come to a master function, the master logic. And what I want here is for our POM and bump offset to be here. If I click here and put a C, put bump and POM, I'll set my font size to 30 and the colour could just be a red. And now what I want is my POM and bump offset to sit in there after the tiling, and then it'll just connect up to the UVs of our texture sample. But if we think about this, guys, once I've got my function in here for POM, this is going to go in there, and then my UVs need to come through this function. Right, I get it. So our input here is the UVs. So our input for the UVs are here, and that will be around here on the function, and then these will just drag into the input of our UVs. Yeah. So once they go in there, if I set this to false, don't use a constant 1 vector, and I just pull off these UVs, I could just do it off this dot actually, and I could put this in the false. So essentially what I'm saying to this function is, if I'm not using visual texture depth, it's just going to come in through the UVs and carry on through into the false of the statement and then out. So essentially my UVs will come into the function, and if it's set to false, it'll just carry on through and come out, and then these will be used by the UVs. Okay, so that seems right for me just now. What I want to do is just apply it. I'm going to give them an order. So my UVs, I'm going to set this priority to a 1, and these just label them up in order like these. This will be set to a 0, and then go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's what it's going to do outside of this function. So I'll set the UVs to a 0. The height texture can be a 1. The height amount can be a 2. The min can be a 3. The maximum steps can be a 4. And then the switches, which is, this can be a 5, and this can be a 6, and the enable texture depth can be a 7. Okay, so let's apply that and save it. We're going to come back to our content drawer, go functions, come to our bump and POM, open the offset parameters. We're just going to drag our logic, what we've just been working in, into here, and you'll see now this function's in here. I can come into there and just pull that to the output. And what I want to do now, I can move that in because it's only displaying UVs. What I can do now is to see this. I do want this height texture and the UVs to be accessible outside this function as well. So I'm going to come back to my bump offset. I'm going to highlight them, hold left control down and highlight them too as well, and put left control and C to copy them. Then I am going to come back to my bump offset parameters, and then left control and V, and we'll get these inputs into there as well. The UVs are going to be first and the height texture is going to be second, which is fine. I'll put them there, and I can simply just wire them into there like that. Right, so now our UVs are going to carry on through here from the outside of this function into this function and carry on through if it's set to false. That's right. What I need now is to right click all these parameters now, what are here, and just promote to parameter. So I'll go right click, promote to parameter. This is height amount. I'm not going to speed the video up, guys, because I'm going to showcase changing defaults here. So in here now, this is a scalar parameter. Coming in, we know the default is 0.03, like I showcased earlier on. For the minimum, I'm going to go 0.1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros, which is the absolute minimum before you get to 0, then minus 0. And put 1. What I'm going to do, I'm going to highlight all that and left control and C and copy it. And then for a maximum, I'm just going to put a 1. The group name, this could just be bump dash POM. And I'm going to set this to, let me open the material instance actually. I come to the mesh master, we'll just come to our floor, which is using this. So we've got, let me just enable everything so I know where I'm up to. What I'm looking for here, guys, hang on, it's all gone funny now. Let's not enable landscape UVs. Let's enable this, and then change rotation, which is there, it's just UVs. What I'm looking for, you can see on my group names, I've got numbers 00, 01, 02, 03. And then 1 is mesh texture maps. Okay, as you can see here, we've got an albedo stacked texture and normal texture. So I'm looking for 04. Shall I have POM as a 04? I don't know, because UV tiling switches, POM and bump offset is utilised with UVs. No, I'm going to go with 00 UV tiling switches. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come to my master logic. No, I'm not. I'll come out of here, I'm going to go to functions, then master function. I'm going to open the params of our master function and see where this is. Oh no, sorry guys, it's the actual UVs that I want. I'm going to close that off. Let's come in here, sorry about this delay, guys. Functions, UV tiling, params, and all I want to do is find these out. So UV tiling switches, so, and there's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. I'm going to come to my bump offset params. I'm just going to go enable texture depth. So if I right click this and promote to a parameter, this is the UV tiling switches. Enable visual texture depth. I'm going to come to the group here. I'm just going to left control and V, and now I've got 00 UV tiling switches, and the last one was 5. And this one could then go to 6, and I will use POM, promote to a parameter, use POM. This can have the same group, like so, and this can be 7, and then use bump offset, promote to a parameter, so use bump offset, and change the group to UV tiling switches, and this could be 8, that's right. So there's our switches set up. Height amount is staying like that. I'm just going to recopy this, left control and C, min steps. Let's get rid of that. I know it's made the video a little bit longer this, but this is what you need to work out if you want to be a technical artist. You got to work out the group so everything's in order and all that good juicy stuff. Default value for this was 8, that's it, yeah. And left control and V. And the maximum I'm going to set to 32, which is the default for our max steps. then I'll promote this to a parameter. And then height max steps. This could be 32. The default. I'll just set these to a minimum. And then 50 is a max. I'll set the min steps to a max of 50 as well, so they're both equal, but they have different values. Okay, so these two I'm going to want in this group, which is bump and POM. Actually, now I'm thinking about this, guys, let me think. So my enable visual texture depth, I'm going to keep as 00 UV tiling switches. But if I open, go to masters, my computer's delaying at the minute. I hope it's not affecting the voice of me, if you like. Mesh master. I'm going to open this scalar parameter again. So I want 04 POM. Right, okay. Come to the params of our. We could shut the tiling params. So 04. So we'll put 04 dash bump POM. And that's going to be the group for these now. Use bump offset and use POM. I'm also going to set to the 04. The reason for that is enable visual texture depth is a part of the UVs. So this can be in the UVs. And once I've enabled it, it will expose our bump offset and POM parameters and switches, which are in their own little group there. But I'll showcase that shortly. Okay, so I'm going to hit apply and save. I'm going to close this material instance, close this. I'm just going to leave that open actually. And then I shall save this and close that. Open our master logic. And now we want to navigate to the function of our bump and POM. If I just simply drag the params function in here, you'll see now we've got our function in here. Like I say, we want these to carry through, so I'm going to hold left control, then click mouse, left mouse click and hold and drag and put that in the results. And then these UVs will just carry on through like I stated before. But now we need a height texture. And as you can see here, like we've been doing over the series, we've got a height reroute declaration node, and this should work actually. If I right click here and name reroutes, go height, and that should slot right into the height, like so. Okay, so that appears to be fine. Let's apply this and save it, so in case we get a crash. Let these shaders compile. What we can do while we're waiting for them shaders to compile is come to our masters. My machine is really slow at the minute, I'm not sure why. Come to materials, mesh master, and we're just going to choose this mesh brick. It's a material instance. I'm just going to drag this straight onto this cube, and our shaders are still compiling, I think. And now we have this on here. I click on this, select the static mesh component, and then double click the material instance. We'll drag this out of the way here. And now this should work. Okay, so as you can see here, my UV tiling switches, I've got enable visual texture depth. As you can see, there is nothing being applied to this, it's just a flat texture. If I just enable this. Okay. Okay, so as you can see, it's just got blank. That's because if we're enabling visual texture depth, we do need to choose which one we want to use. So we'll test the bump offset first. If I enable this, it should now appear. Like so. And down here, we have height amount. That's all we had. If we click height amount, just increase this a touch. You can see now we're getting that depth in our brickwork. If I put 0, it's gone. You can see the mortar on the brick 0.02, 0.03, 5. Oh yeah, it's definitely working. 0.05, 0.04, 0.03. 0. It's definitely working. 1, oh, 0.1. There you go. Okay, so as you can see now we're getting depth through our height amount of our bump offset. I'll just reset this back to 0, default, which is 0.03. We're getting a tiny bit of depth, and that looks okay at an angle like this. So we're going to disable bump offset, and I'm going to use POM. Let's see what happens here. Okay, it seems to be working okay. I come down here now and move out. Let's increase this height amount, and there you go. You can see the depth. If I increase this like silly, like this, you're starting to see this gap in between the brick. I do go over why this is happening, but you can see it's moving depending on our reference plane. But if I enable our min and max steps, you can actually play with these values, which will get rid of them artifacts. So you just got to be really slow with them. And now it looks okay. We got a bit of dodginess at the bottom here. There we go. That's nice. And there you go. And that is simply it. Now we have added bump offset and parallax occlusion mapping. Let's reduce that height because it looks silly. And now we've added bump offset and parallax occlusion mapping to our master material, and they work. So if I disable use texture depth, you'll see we're back to normal now. We can change our UVs and all that good stuff. Okay, so what I want to do now is to just briefly go over what we've done here. Well, I'm not going to go over what we've done. We've created this function now. Keeping in mind that parallax occlusion mapping and bump offset is very expensive. Maybe not so much bump offset, but parallax occlusion mapping is. And it may be a good idea, like I've done here, I've showcased putting this comment box here, is to just remove this function, because every time you use this master function, it's going to build this, whether you use that or not. So it might be a good idea just to remove the function, have your UVs coming in, and when you want to use it, bring it in. But if not, you can leave it in there. Depends how expensive you want your shader. But yeah, that's it for this week now. In the next video, we're going to start looking at triplanar projection. That is very useful stuff. It's very good stuff to have. It's also in with the UVs. But yeah, we'll look at that, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the subscribe and hit the like button, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.